Welcome, everybody. This is our June installment of our 2025 Summer Discussion Series, so our first one. We are joined by Elizabeth Muehlner. She is the founder of The Human Factor. She holds an CCEC and SPHR. She's a business coach of 25 years, helping companies optimize their productivity by creating and sustaining a culture that supports productivity at its foundation. She does custom outplacement, career management services, culture coaching, and helps with mergers and acquisitions, talent due diligence. Today, she's going to teach us how to find your perfect elevator pitch. So if anybody wants to work on that solo, after she has a little bit of information to give us, we invite you to turn your cameras on if you want. And then she will have a Q&A, just kind of more of a discussion series than it is a talk. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Hey, thanks for having me. We've got how many people on right now? We got about, 6, 7? Or are there more?
Right now I'm showing 16.
Okay, terrific. Well, let's roll right into this then. I really appreciate you joining me for on your lunch hour. I'm sure you're hoping I say something profound, and quite frankly, I kind of hope so too. Helping other people know who you are and what you bring is really important in a job search. But self-presentation in any professional setting is a must for career success. Our appearance, our demeanor, and our elevator speech, helps create a great first impression. And first impressions are important. I mean, they're pretty lasting. And that's because that's based in science. Our brains work on they tend to use this bias rather. And the anchoring bias is the tendency to be influenced by the first thing that we see or hear. And we kind of project that forward to adjust to anything, before we're making a decision. You can actually change a first impression, but it takes 200 alternative interactions to make that change happen. So you see how, impactful a first impression can be. So anyway, today I want to provide you with some information so that we can communicate who we are, what we do, and why it matters with confidence and authenticity and adaptability. I think that's a really important part too. As she mentioned, we're going to have some time for Q&A at the end. Also, the team has also provided me with some great general questions from folks that, we can go through and answer at the end. It'll help kind of put into practice some of the things that I want to tell you about. And I got to tell you, honestly, if at any time during this talking head section, if you got a question, you want some extra clarity, please just jump in, okay? All right. So I guess the first thing I got to tell you is that, well, two things. This morning, while I was, putting the finishing touches on what I was going to tell you, my printer went offline and I couldn't get it back online. So I've got about an hour's worth of, material not memorized and no access to it. So I've had to do some deep breathing, to get things settled down, but I've got it now in front of me, so we're good to go. The other thing I got to tell you is that anytime I hear the term elevator speech, I just cringe. I mean, I know what an elevator speech, I know where the origin for that name came from. It's being able to talk about yourself real concise way about as much time as it would take for a brief elevator ride. But the mental picture I get when I hear that term elevator speech is being cornered in an elevator by somebody wearing really bad plaid polyester pants trying to sell me something I don't want. So for the sake of not sending me into, trauma counseling, I may refer to this throughout the presentation as frame of reference statement instead of elevator speech. And when you think about it, it really is kind of what we need to relay, right? When we're talking about ourselves, our task is to build a framework to which the listener can relate, okay? So that they can reference it later when they make a meaningful connection to what we're telling them. So a frame of reference statement isn't necessarily a bad term. All right, so to build a solid frame of reference statement, it takes 3 parts. It takes foundation, mindset, and the words, the actual words. Okay. Now, the foundation consists of emotional homework. Nobody likes that. I'll just tell you right off the bat, because it's hard. And the reason we have to do it is because people find it very difficult to talk about ourselves. In my coaching practice, I find that no matter what the level of is the executive I'm working with or how articulate they are, people still struggle when it comes time to tell others about themselves. And I've asked myself too why I struggle with it. And I've done some personal reflection on this, and I've decided that what it is for me is that I really don't pay a lot of attention to what I do, or at least maybe I don't give it any real credence. I just do it, you know? I mean, can you relate to that? Probably you do it too, right? You just do it. And so when somebody asks me what I do, I really get that deer in the headlights look in my eyes and go, I don't know, you know, which isn't great considering that, you know, I teach people how to talk about themselves for a living. But you got to figure out what's behind all that, you know? So, I mean, I want you to, if you haven't done it already, I want you to really start giving some thought to why is it so hard to talk about myself? And there's some possibilities, right? It could be like cultural conditioning or gender norms, okay? My mom always told us as kids, don't brag, you know, and be modest. She said that Jesus was humble and that we should be like Jesus, right? Makes sense. In sports, we're taught to be a good sport and to be a gracious winner, okay? So when we come into adulthood, we come with a tendency to deflect praise and to avoid appearing boastful. And to top that off, there's always the girl training, you know, how our society generally socializes, especially female children, to be polite and considerate, defer to others, you know, not to brag. And this presents a common challenge that women face when it comes to talking about ourselves. And that includes downplaying our accomplishment statement and the dreaded imposter syndrome. You know, and that's where you feel like you really don't actually do what it is you do. That you haven't really earned your success, and that everybody's going to find out any minute that you've just been faking it. You know, that's the imposter syndrome. And like I said, it's alive and well out there. So with all that pre-programmed thought in our heads, we end up fearing that we're being too much or not enough. And that internal narrative really impacts how we show up in the world. So we don't have to stay stuck in this, though. If we dig deep enough, we can uncover exactly what our little voices, you know, that voice in the back of your head that kind of whispers to you, you know. We can figure out what that little voice is telling us, and we can expose those thoughts to the reality, you know, the light of day, which is that still true today? In today's world, in this situation, is that thought that's in the back of my head all the time telling me I'm a fake, or, you know, I'm not really that good, or I shouldn't brag, or whatever, you know, is that really applicable in today's world, in this moment, in this situation? So we have to ask, is it still true, right? And when we determine the truth and viability of our own personal little voice, we can appropriately adjust that internal message. An adjusted little voice and authentically owning what it is that we do will set us up for success when we try to communicate those things with other people. As we're creating our statement, I want you to try thinking about your accomplishments and what it is you do like this. Say, man, I am really grateful that I got to do what I do, you know, and do my part in it. I know I didn't do it alone. but I'm really happy that I got a chance to do my part. And that's cool. And if you take it with that kind of a tone with yourself inside, then I don't think you're going to come out sounding like, well, we've all heard those people where you just kind of sit back and go, ew, and we definitely don't want to do that. So I think, like I said, that attitude towards ourselves, that graciousness, really does help a lot. So you see, it's really important to do the honest, fearless, emotional homework if you're going to be confident and authentic. While I was working on this presentation, the song by Jim Croce, I Got a Name, came into my head. And if you haven't ever heard that song, you're nodding, yeah? Go back and listen to it. Look it up. Jim Croce, I Got a Name. Okay? The tone, the tempo. He mixes that right pride and freedom with to be endearingly and unapologetically and authentically exactly who he is. And it was really great inspiration, when I started to try and write my, frame of reference statement. Yeah, it's good stuff. So the first thing that we do in creating our frame of reference statement then is to do the emotional homework to manage our internal dialogue. The second thing we do is to shift our mindset. I mean, when you think about putting together an elevator speech, are you really thinking about what people need to hear in order to help them succeed? Or are you thinking about, oh God, how can I sell myself? And the mind shift is that we need to focus on what can we say that's going to benefit this person the most. And when we do that, man, we're like more than halfway there. So you want to think about reframing your intent, okay? Talk not to self-promote, but to create an audience needs-based communication, not to a sales pitch, okay? Forget the self-advocacy. Ask questions of your listeners first, okay? Ask the questions first. You'll find that when you're thinking about them and not yourself, your own voice, will be authentic and professional and not arrogant. Because I think, like I said, a lot of people worry about sounding arrogant. Then step 3 is finding the words, okay? When you articulate who you are as a professional, try developing some statements around role, level, and setting, okay? Your role, your level, and your setting. I don't really like job titles, okay? When you think about your role, I want you to try and think about it in more general terms. I get real skittish about job titles because when you say a job title, you basically pigeonhole yourself in the listener's ear, okay? And you don't want to do that because when you pigeonhole yourself, that's all they ever think about you. It's okay, I'm a manager, or I manage, I'm a manager of blah, 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 right? So they think you're a manager level. Well, what if in your company, manager is actually director level responsibility? And you've got all the horsepower it takes to be the director or the VP, but they've heard manager, so that's the way they're going to pigeonhole you. Like I said, it really eliminates possibilities for you. So think about the role instead of the title, okay? And it gives you more of a general basis to talk about what you do. When you think about the setting or industry, it's a pretty broad topic as well, which gives a lot of leeway for conversations and discussions. I mean, if you tell somebody, I'm in the aerospace industry, watch their facial expression. Aerospace, well, who doesn't love rockets? And so they're going to be naturally curious, and that starts to form that connection, which is really what you're after, okay? Depending on the setting, you may wish to include a little bit of personal identity with your professional role. Like, if I say, I'm a business coach and I am a natural born kibitzer. Okay, so it gives a little bit of softening, gives a little bit more insight into why I do what I do. And then when you talk about what you do, you want to kind of think about giving them a glimpse of a day in your life, okay? A short quip about your skills, your duties, your specializations. And if something sets you apart, then that's a good time to be able to work that in too. And then why it matters, okay? Does what you do impact, how does it impact the world? Of course it impacts the world, but how does it impact the world, you know? Or a company or a cause. If it's done in an appropriate way, like a story, a passion, or a value, it humanizes your message. If it's appropriate, say it's in a networking setting, you also might say what you're looking for. Okay, now that's not always the appropriate thing to talk about, depending on the setting, but in a networking situation, you can always talk about, what you're looking for, like a new opportunity, a collaborator in the business I'm starting, a mentor, or my favorite is to ask for advice. So we'll talk more about that in these questions that I've got here. And just a note, try not jumping in with your name first. I find that people don't really remember names until they have some context around it, so it becomes relevant to them. So you might want to try saying your name last. So here's an example of somebody's statement. It's like, I currently manage tech projects. I've had the opportunity to align cross-functional teams to deliver scalable digital products. I really love creating systems that make teams more efficient and self-directed. Something like that. So see, it's very conversational. And it doesn't really talk about a job title, but it does paint a picture. So when you go back and you think about, make kind of a list of ways to describe your role, make a little list of, how to talk about your industry, as you're getting these words together, okay, for the actual statement. Think about what it is you do, think about why it matters. And then, as you kind of start to put that together, the words begin to flow after you've done the emotional homework and changed your mindset, right? Then you put the words together. Some delivery tips would be to be conversational instead of robotic, right? You kind of have to adapt to the situation, read the room and have a couple different versions ready, and like I said, you just don't memorize them. You just want to really remember the message and your intent. You have to own your story, say it like you believe it. Listen to the I've Got a Name song. That'll help. Keep it dynamic. When you think about your career, I want you to think about it as dynamic. It's always changing every day. There's probably something new that you've experienced or learned that can kind of add to your story. So one of the things that I think is important is to also keep a kind of a running highlight list of the things that you do and the things that you accomplish. This is particularly important. I always advise my career candidates that, when they start their new job, at least once a year, update your resume, and do that by keeping a file folder, either online or at your desk that talks about, that lists the things that you do every day. Every time you've done something to make the company advance, to make the company more money, whether it's something that you've done to save money or something that you've done to increase profitability, something that you've done to save time, increase safety. Think about all the different things that you do that positively impact a business. Write it down. Write down the quantification. What was it before you started? What was it after? What's that delta? We can make some incredible resume points, with quantifications like that. to show how effective you are. And I think that in itself is a great exercise. When you go back to that emotional homework piece, you should start to look at what it is you've done. What have you contributed? Own that, you know? The other thing is to practice out loud. That's important. That's important. You have to be careful who you practice in front of. I think friends and spouses, partners, and parents, they tend to be hypercritical or maybe just they'll cast their fears or situations on you sometimes. I think pets are a really good thing to practice in front of. They're pretty non-judgmental. It's just important that you hear yourself saying, these statements before you practice out in public. So it's not all that complicated, but it's not easy. So to kind of summarize, you have to do the emotional homework, find out what your little voice is telling you and challenge it. Okay? Shift your mindset from speaking to asking questions, from selling to listening for the needs of your listener, right? From self-promotion to relating and connecting others' needs to your offerings. And then let the words about your role, level, setting, offerings, your passion, just let them flow together and keep it short. And that's about the basic guidelines. Then we can get into some actual applications. Okay? Questions so far?
I had one.
Yeah.
And I might have missed it. So I was taking some notes, so it might have been why I missed it because I was still writing.
That's okay.
You said the development statement around role, level, and setting is what I wrote down.
Yeah.
And I got the role and that setting, but I think I might have missed what you mentioned about level.
Level?
Yeah.
Okay. So like I said, you kind of want to stay away from job titles.
Job title. Okay. So I did write that down, but I just didn't.
Yeah. So you can use words like manage, and it could be a function or people, right? You can use words like lead. I lead a team of 10 people, and see, but that doesn't really give a title, right? Yep. So it leaves the listener more mental room, yeah?
Okay. Thanks for covering that again.
No problem. Anything else for right now? Okay. All right. So some of the questions that you guys sent me, and they were good questions. So let's move into that. The first question was, what are the most common mistakes people make in their elevator pitches? And honestly, I think it's the wrong mindset. Starting out with the wrong mindset. It causes an uncomfortable delivery because it skips that part about the connection. Connecting with that person has to come first. And to do that, you got to listen, and you have to ask questions first, because there isn't anybody who's got the answers without asking the questions first. So find out a little bit about them. You kick it off, say, oh, really? What do you do? And what are some of the biggest challenges that you're finding this year in what you do? And then you listen. That'll cue you into which one of your statements you use when it's time to talk about yourself. And just remember, you're teaching, not selling. And if you can offer some useful information, I think that's always a good way to connect with somebody. The next question was, how do you tailor your pitch depending on your audience? And for that, I want you to think about what information that listener truly needs to hear. What would benefit them most? Kind of sounds like a recording by now, doesn't it? Anytime you're thinking about their needs and not yours, your conversation with them is going to be memorable. Think about thinking about what the listener needs takes time and attention prior to delivery. So like I said, try to ask them the questions first. Next question was, how long should an ideal elevator pitch actually be? Is the 30-second rule still relevant? Yeah, it is. I actually did a little research on this, and I found out that I mean, I know people's minds drift. I used to tell people when you're putting together your, tell me about yourself answer during a job interview, keep it to less than 45 seconds. And so I just did some research. The attention span's actually gone down in the last 15 years. Since the last time they measured it, the average attention span of a human adult is only 8.25 seconds. That's not very long. So that means that I lost you a really long time ago in this presentation, right? So, yeah, keep it short. All right, next question is, what's more important, the content of the pitch or the delivery style? Tone, body language, etc. And the answer is yes, they're equally important. Maybe. No, they're both really important. But when you think about communication, you break it down, the words we use only consist of 7% of our communication. Only 7% are the words we use. Tone of voice is 37%, and body language is 55%. Now, this kind of underlines the reason that the emotional homework part is so important. Because when you think about it, 93% of our communication is subconscious. Body language and tone of voice come from your subconscious. So if you don't have that stuff in order, the words you use aren't going to have that much of an impact. Real credibility is when your facial expressions, your body language, your tone of voice, and your words all match. Okay? So, next question. How often should someone update or change their pitch, especially as their goals evolve? I say use the rule of relevance there, It's all about answering the listener's needs with relevant information. So ask the questions first. And is there a recommended structure or formula for an effective elevator pitch? And I think some of that depends on the situation. If you're at a generic social event and someone says, so what do? You can devise a conversational version of role, level, and setting. If you're in a more of a business focused situation, try to get your questions in first. Ask them, so what do you do? Or what company do you work for? And then say, the whatever industry, what's the top challenge you're facing this year? Say you're gathering information from them. You're truly interested, right? And you're gathering information from them so that your answers now will help you know how you can best serve this person. And then you'll know what information to use, which frame of reference statement for. The next question is, how do you adjust your elevator pitch on the fly if the listener is distracted or uninterested? I kind of guess that depends on what the distraction is, I mean, if there's an explosion in the next room, they're not going to be listening to your elevator pitch. But if they're uninterested, I don't know. I think that you need to switch to asking them some questions at that point. Just kind of read the room. And again, anytime you ask somebody questions, it's got to be based on your real interest in them as a human. And then it's always natural then. The next question was, how can introverts or people who get nervous in social settings still give a powerful elevator pitch? I love that. Because first of all, introverts, they'll be fatigued by long periods of extreme social interaction. And they may prefer not to be in extreme social situations at all. But that said, I think most introverts have an advantage in a networking situation because they're usually better listeners. They tend to pay closer attention to detail. And they have a tendency to mull things over in their own head before they speak. Those are all good conversation, principles. So social anxiety, which sadly is fairly prevalent, is another story, though. Introversion and social anxiety are two different things. Social anxiety is pretty miserable, and it can stop people from advancing in their careers. But when you think about some of the things that we've covered in preparing a good frame of reference statement, it can help ameliorate some of that anxiety. So, preparing that frame of reference, a couple different versions, using that better mindset, about and asking good questions, using solid listening skills before speaking, and focus on that person's needs, on tuning into that and connecting with that person. And I think that in itself can help with some of the social anxiety, because it takes the spotlight off you. Another question, can you give an example of a really successful elevator pitch that you've heard or delivered, and what makes it stand out? I've got a great example that I use in my job search workbook. It really stands out because it uses some keywords that are more general rather than specific about role, level, and setting. And it's a real conversational tone. So think about, listen through this and see if you can kind of picture this person in their work environment. It says, for the past 12 years, I've been in charge of the customer service department for a small manufacturer of trailer haulers. Mainly, I've been managing a dozen customer service reps and taking care of the training and troubleshooting. See? Conversational. It talks about role, level, and setting, though. And it uses words that other humans can relate to. Everybody knows what a customer service department looks and feels like, right? Manufacturing environment, managing people, training, troubleshooting. Those are all light up spots in your brain that you already know about. And that's good, because that's exactly what you want to try and do, is get that person to relate to you. Okay? If that person was in a job search and this were a networking event, at the end of that, they might say, I'm looking for a new spot though. And also, did you notice what my face and my head was doing when I said that? I'm looking for a new spot though, right? You make direct eye contact, you smile, and you nod your head yes a little bit. That's called neuro-linguistic programming. Basically what you're saying is, and I'm great with that, and now so are you. Another question. How do you follow up after giving your elevator pitch, especially in a networking or career setting? Personally, I like to ask for advice, mostly because I'm really interested in, learning more. And I know that, okay, I'm smart, but there are a lot of smart people in the world, and all that smart together is even more powerful. So asking for advice is a really good thing. So if I were a job seeker, I might say, I'm currently looking for the next step in my career path, and I could use some advice. Would you consider meeting with me for about 30 minutes next week? I'd love to brainstorm with you on the next logical move for me. Okay, and you see what they're saying, right? And then you ask them, may I have your contact information so I can set up a meeting? Okay. People love to help. They do. I swear to God, they do. It's part of our nature. It's part of our wiring. I don't know if it's a Darwinian thing, survival of the species, or if it's a spiritual thing, We're all children of God, and so we need to help each other. Whatever it is, it's wired in. It's hardwired in that people really do want to help. All you got to do is ask them. The only thing is, you got to ask them for what they have and what they can give, right? Everybody's got a few minutes. Everybody's got advice. So you just ask for those things. It's really effective. All right. So now, what I want you to do, if you haven't already put together a statement, I'd like you to try to work on that the next week, and then try to use it in conversations and see how the focus on them shifts your conversation and creates ease and connection. Because I think it'll work. Okay, now your questions. Do you have follow-up questions for any of that, or any personal stumbling blocks that you've had in talking about yourself that you'd like
I
to
think
share?
the older you get, the more the experience you have, almost the harder it is to put it into a very small package.
Yeah, exactly. What is it you do?
You flipped it around on me. I wasn't ready for that. So I run the aftermarket division of an injection molding company in the RV industry.
Oh, cool. That sounds busy.
It is. That's one of my jobs. The other one is I run the RV Women's Alliance.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So were those short and precise enough?
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, I got a good mental picture about what you did and could relate to some of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I come from a company that doesn't believe in titles like president, vice president, stuff like that. Your title is kind of like what you do. You manage, you do that and do that. It is kind of refreshing to kind of lose that. I don't know, with titles come like this thought of like power. And I don't think power is the right thing to have in a leadership position. I think mentoring and all that kind of stuff comes more into that. It. You take that title away, I think you kind of become more relatable to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. I love that philosophy. Yeah, and it's true. It's absolutely true. It opens up a lot of possibilities, All right. What else?
I have another one. Doing your emotional homework sounds daunting. But I guess if you had to pick two things, where do you start? What's the best way to kind of start doing your emotional homework to get somewhere without feeling overwhelmed?
I don't know. I go to overwhelm pretty quickly.
Yeah, I know. So do I.
But, ever since I can remember, my favorite question is why. I love asking why. I always have. And so I've always pondered, okay, so I did this. I kind of have to be self-aware of what it is you did, right? And then you ask yourself, why did I do that? Why did I say that, And then I will sit around and I'll think about it until I figure it out. My brain tends to move more into the logical, so I can figure out why I do the things. I have trouble connecting to the emotional part of it, though, to process that part. But I think that once you figure it out, honestly, sometimes this stuff is just the words of well-intentioned adults in our life when we were kids. They want us to behave ourselves. I've got a little grandson, 7 years old, a lot of energy. And when we're in a grocery store or God forbid, Meyer or someplace that has toys, he gets very excited. And so he's kind of all over the place and he's not paying any attention to his movement as it interferes with other people's personal space. And so I'll always tell him, Maverick, be careful. Watch what other people are doing. Be conscientious of other people. And I'm hammering that into his head so he doesn't crash into somebody, right? Well, what kind of little voice am I planting in his head? Maverick, you don't really matter. Other people matter more than you. Maverick, I'm going to yell at you again because you're considering yourself over other people. Hey, is that what our parents did to us? Did they give us messages meant for a specific situation that we've internalized to the point where we're thinking we don't really matter? Therefore, what we do doesn't really contribute. You see what I'm saying? You kind of have to be aware of what it is you're doing, why you're doing it. What did you just say to your own kid? Chances are you just parroted a parent or a teacher's voice, So I guess part of the first step is just kind of start paying attention, especially as it relates to how you're feeling when you're in a situation where you have to talk about yourself.
Okay.
And if your mind blanks, why does it blank? And then just dig in a little bit.
Because I have 8.5 seconds or 8.25 seconds of the average attention span. That's why.
You wrote that down. I like
I did. Because it explains my husband. That's yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now listen, when it comes to men,
Mm-hmm.
that's a whole deeper story because men's brains and women's brains are actually constructed differently. The corpus callosum, that big membrane that divides the brains into two hemispheres, it's different in men than it is in women. And one of the ways that manifests itself is that men will focus like a laser, one thing at a time. Women will change their focus frequently and more adaptively. Okay. So when you're talking about a man and you're talking about that 8.25 seconds, and it's probably less. I like the idea of being able to get information from that person before you speak. I think that's really important. I think that would make it most memorable because then again, you're helping them. You're helping them.
Can it be too polished?
Yeah. And I've heard those before.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really bad. I'd rather stumble through one than I would be rehearsed too much. Yeah.
What are some things that you can add to try not to be too polished? Because there are some people that they're so used to having to kind of give their elevator pitch to people often, where it kind of does become so redundant.
Yeah.
It's polished. What are some things that you can incorporate to kind of change that a little bit?
I think it's the personal connection first. You got to connect with that person first. And for me to connect with somebody, I want to know stuff about them. I'm interested, I want to learn about them. And so I naturally lead with questions. And so that gets the conversation going. And then when they ask me about what do, I go, oh, well, and then it's more animated. It's more spontaneous, even though I may have the words grouped somewhere in my head, So I guess it's connect. That saying about people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It really is true. It's really true. Anybody else? Anybody want to practice and brainstorm? We've got a couple more minutes.
Savannah was talking about, how do you not come off sounding too polished or rehearsed? Yeah. And what crossed my mind, and I wanted to get your input on that, was what about just pausing before just jumping into a response? I mean, because honestly, in my mind, that kind of portrays the fact that you're thinking about, well, how would I answer that question? And not just going, oh, I know that. That's my answer to this question. I mean, it's kind of curious if that also played a role in not coming off too polished, is, taking a moment to prepare yourself for which answer you're going to give, even though you probably already know it instantaneous.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a real natural response, actually, because if you've truly listened to what that person has said in response to your questions, you are going to take a pause and go, well, because you're going to need to assimilate what they've said and then translate it into what can I say to them that will be helpful, right? Yeah. It's a good idea. You can connect with me through LinkedIn. Just look for, I think it's Elizabeth J. Milner. Certainly if you've got some questions and you want to reach out to me through LinkedIn, be more than happy to answer those questions. If you want to write one of your frame of reference statements, and send it to me and we can brainstorm it together. I'm very good with that. That's cool. In my contact information on LinkedIn, you'll find my email address and my phone number as well. So, I want to be available to you. Hey, thank you so much. That was a lot of fun. I'm really glad to meet you guys.
We have 2 more discussions in July. We are talking with Justin about introduction to AI and how you can manage that since it is so fast growing. I know a lot of people are worried about that right now. And then in August, that'll be July 16th. Then August 20th, we are meeting with Shelly from First Bank to talk about strategies for money management. So make sure to look for both of those as well.
Good.
We appreciate it, Elizabeth. Everybody have a great rest of your week. If you are going to the Scramble on Friday, we will see you there.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.